Hey there! So, welcome to the stream, everybody. I may end up closing up this window, so I'm not given the very distracting effort of looking at myself. I've also ramped up the volume, so hopefully you'll be able to hear me this time, and I have your questions. Now, I've launched straight into my introduction because I'm one of those people who finds those YouTube preambles where it's 15 minutes of introduction, 10 minutes of content and 15 minutes of closing, a little bit iffy, but just to let you know who I am MissPearl, aka Pearl O. Leslie. I am the writer of OMissPearl.com, a Femdom blog that's been going on for 10 years this June. I have several spicy books on Amazon, and I've been active as a community organizer, or sometimes disorganizer, as a volunteer, moderator on several different web forums, and now I'm doing live streams because somebody gave me a camera and I don't see why I shouldn't. So, today's topic, as voted on by my lovely audience on Twitter, if you want to be part of that audience, hi you over to the same username, OMissPearl, on Twitter, and you'll be able to find me there and Instagram. And of course, you know what you have to do, like and subscribe. And I get to make this little gesture pointing down because the uniform nature of the YouTube format means the button's always there. Kind of awesome, isn't it? Anyway, let's look at these lovely questions. We have several. Oh yeah, if you're under the age of 18, this is not for you. You're not old enough for this yet. I'm very sorry. Minors, please do not engage. Any contact with this material is at the discretion of your parent and or guardian. I am not in a position to keep you safe in any sort of adult environment, okay? Thank you. All right, where to start? I've got a whole bunch of different questions. That's a lot. And I do apologize for the light quality. I'm functioning off of a couple of potatoes. Also, well, my room gets lovely light. Unfortunately, as you can see, it gets lovely light, which means that you have everything that a streamer's not supposed to have, which is a big bright light behind me. That means that it has a tendency for the light and camera in front of me to think that that's the important light and everything is like shadowed from behind. But I don't mind looking weird and ominous. Weird and ominous is great. Who doesn't want to look weird and ominous? Let's start with Black Wolf's pup, who just bombarded me with questions, which I'm very happy to look into. And they asked, I find that BDSM is full of so many paradoxes, like freedom through bondage, pleasure through pain. What are some of your favorite paradoxes in kink? And or why do you think it's so paradoxical? And they do have a follow-up question, but let's start by answering this one. In my perspective, I don't really find any disconnect between the pleasure-pain spectrum. I think that it's the simplicity of the human body that makes so many things possible, and I think it's the richness of the human experience. I think that concepts like freedom and pleasure can be surprisingly abstract and surprisingly subjective. And I think that ultimately the allure of BDSM for me is the immersion in fantasy. The sensations are nice, don't get me wrong, and the emotions can be very, very real, but it's a built connection between two different people. And I think ultimately, if I had to talk about any particular paradox and controversy, I would have to say there's the elephant in the room with BDSM, which is that regardless of how safe and enjoyable the practices are, it's ultimately telling a story about things that would not be acceptable under other circumstances. Now, I'm not one of those people who thinks you can only tell wholesome, improving stories that are good role models and where the bad guy always comes to bad ends. Like, I don't think the Hays Code does anyone any good, so I don't think you should be running the Hays Code on your sex life either. But, be that as it may, for me, kink is in this interesting space where we put a lot of effort into reassuring people that it's safe, precisely because we're terrified it'll be taken away from us, and not an unreasonable concern in this world, that we often don't take much time to examine internally what we may or may not have been doing. And Black Wolf's pup Black Wolf's Pups. Sorry about that. I hate mangling people's names. Their follow-up question was, do you think that doing kink is an ever-escalating process? Does it tend to escalate from vanilla-ish to more and more extreme as time goes by? Or do you think it stabilizes after a while? What are some trajectories of a kinkster's life that you've witnessed or experienced? Is kink like a drug that one needs more and more, to take more and more of? What can a person do to sustain their kink life? In my opinion, no. Some people start out as a particular kind of fetishist. Rubber is their thing. They do rubber. Rubber is awesome. Some people sample from a full buffet. Their kinks ebb and flow. Their journey is very genuine but ever changing. Some people never are interested at all, and you could expose them to all the kink in the world, and their thought will be, oh, thank you, but no thank you. And all these journeys are correct and wonderful and perfectly okay, and you should be happy with whatever there is that anyone wants to do in that way. No judgment. I'm not one of those people who are like, even vanilla. I would say that I have noticed a general trajectory that the more starved of sexuality you are, the less picky you are about what you get. So if you live in a culture where you absolutely never get to talk to anyone of the gender you're attracted to, you can obviously expect that you're going to be bowled over by just a chance to talk to them. But this isn't necessarily a factor of you only developing kinks when you get to talk to that person long enough to determine you can do what you want. It's more getting to feel out what is better for you. Think about when you were a kid and you got to try the limited diet we tend to give children. Many kids that it starts off with various vegetable purees after they're weaned, and then you move up to things like Cheerios and simple things like chicken nuggets or various kinds of noodle, things like that that kids like, or fruit. And these are wonderful things, and some people go on to discover other things that they might enjoy. They try different cuisines, they try family favorites, sometimes there's comfort food they want to go back to. I feel that people's approach to kink is a lot closer to their approach to food. And yeah, there's a few people who are like super, I'm gonna lean into it. And you can associate those with being like the people who really like spicy food and are forever chasing, yeah, this is the best ghost pepper ever. Yum, yum, yum. That's perfectly reasonable, but most people's response to spice is a little bit of spice is nice. I mean, putting pepper in my food's always good. And I think that that's a more realistic approach to it. I also think that it's important to make the distinction that most humans are doing BDSM or some sort of thing at least part of the time, or at least fantasizing about it. We keep doing these sex surveys about what people think about, and kinky fantasies come up more often than they don't. And I think we put the idea that BDSM is this tiny minority, maybe like 1 in 100 strange people in a warehouse somewhere doing weird, gothy things. And to be honest, it largely happens in the place of the sort of couples where you wouldn't really even think about their sex life because they don't make it their business to wander around being very titillating for other people. It's between them and their partner. And that's also perfectly fine. And I think it helps to remember that it's not as sensational as you think it is. It's actually a really straightforward, fun, imaginative way to show other people a connection with it, whether it be love, pleasure, philosophical exploration. Fill ya boots. And why don't we skip over some of their other questions and move on to some of the things that other people asked so we can cover over other people too so they don't get left out. So, Literatus. Is that pronounced Literatus? Literatus. Literatus. There we go. I enjoy your NC, that's non-consent, ownership and imprisonment fiction. Do these desires inform your IRL, in real life, play in any way? Is there a way to roleplay or appropriately explore these desires? Hey, thanks for asking. That's actually a question that it's good to have information out there. I do write a lot of fiction on the more darker side of things, and hey, I get to use scare quotes. My fiction often deals with positions of captivity, places where the person doesn't have any control, and the flagging of NC or non-consent is a pretty good way of approaching the topic. A common way that other people will tag their material when they want you to know that it's a present element is CNC, consensual non-consent. And the answer to how do you play these things out is roleplay. You create interesting stories of adventures, and you put them in a safe context where you always have the ability to say no and tap out. And if you really, really are into immersive role playing or into the immersive presence of the sensation of these power structures and the lack of control and choice, you make sure that it's built into your dynamic and that you trust your partner and that you're both on the same page. I'm not going to say it's necessarily going to be the easiest thing you could do if your idea of a nice time is being locked in a closet and held prisoner 24/7. This may be a little harder to realize, and your concerns about doing this may be more concerned with how do we pay the rent on the closet than even finding some person who's willing to do this to you in any way that puts you in any danger. So again, it's more about balancing the everyday needs of your life with the desire to play. And I really, really like that term play to describe all the BDSM things they do with each other. It's not even a euphemism. It really encompasses the full scope of what you can do, both the exploration of human sexuality and also the things that are not sexual for the people to whom it's not. It's a great, big, beautiful arc that includes everything from things you'd explicitly recognize as sex, even if English wasn't your first language and you had no idea what was going on between the people who were doing it, or the language of the couple, I suppose, since kink's fairly universal. But it can also mean things that are so divorced from anything you might necessarily consider sex that although they're pleasurable for those people, they aren't. Or it could be things that would explicitly seem sexual to you that are not, in fact, sexual to the people involved. It's very much an open thing. In practice, I find as much as safe words are very useful, and a safe word is a phrase that means no when you're doing something where your partner is allowed to say things like no or don't, but it doesn't actually mean no because you want the experience of your no being ignored. The other important thing with safe words is to take the time to pay attention to your partner and build up slowly. We put a lot of emphasis on safe words, but just like humans can be very bad at saying no in the moment, and I'm saying this for the protection of the dominant or the top, you want the ability to pay attention to your partner and the confidence to pull the plug at any point that you're not sure your partner is actually okay. You should build slowly over time, learning things. Learn how your partner reacts to things. Learn the different contexts of your partner's reactions. Enjoy the contribution of the traffic outside as people commute home from their long days of work. I beg your pardon, but these things do happen. Anywho, this sort of slow build up from a lighter, less intense point and a point of really knowing your partner can be key to exploring darker topics. Okay, so Sammy, also known as Sub Kitten Boy on Twitter, asked, "Do you have any plushies?" Well, we have some of the gallery out there. There's a childhood bear right there, and to get used to the mirroring of the camera, see if I move it up like that, it's going down like that. Ah, that's hilarious. All right, so the thing I'm pointing at right now, those are two IKEA plushies that also keep me company. And I'm sure that that's about the absolute limit and that there's no other plushies at all present. There's nothing at all to worry about. Those are all the plushies and you can see where they are. Nothing could possibly go wrong and everything's fine. All right, and the next question is from Peroxide. Peroxide and I go way back. I've known them for a long time. Did you bully boys into forming the Good Boys Club, invitations only, using some sort of dominatrix mind trick? And then they very sensibly dropped a link to the Discord, which is a sub-men or male-identified or leaning non-binary. We're not making the distinction there. It's your gender, but basically for men and for people who are looking for a masculine exploration of things, sub-male support group. there was a little while they were calling themselves the Bruised Boys, but apparently the Good Boys Club won out. And the answer to that is I used the terrible, terrible trick of having a point and knowing that most people are looking to be asked to do something. And this is neither a dominant nor submissive fact about humans. It's a fact of human nature that it's much easier to carry on a conversation than it is to talk to a wall. This is actually considerably more challenging to talk to you like this and to be aware of myself in isolation than it would be if I met you at a table or something and we were having a conversation. I should lose myself into paying attention to your reactions. Instead, what you have here is me talking into a camera and just about recording myself live. And well, I can bring up myself over on YouTube and see myself because there's a slight delay. It's slightly less painful to watch myself in OBS. If I was a big-time streamer, I'd totally have someone off to the side watching the chat and passing me things on another screen. That's what professionals do. But if there's one thing I'm not, it's professional. But I got completely off topic anyway. So there's two questions there. There's the begging the question built-in thing there of what is the Good Boys Club and should you join? Do you think male applies to you, at least in the loosest of sense? Doesn't matter if you're male because you're trans male, cis male, you're non-binary, but you amend that as non-binary man because that's how some people do it. Yes, if you also identify as sub, submissive, switch, bottom, pup, slave, cub, anything that you consider yourself in a diminutive or vulnerable position as part of your sexual or emotional landscape, yes, the Good Boys Club is for you. And the reason why the Good Boys Club exists is because submissive men are the least supported group in BDSM. As much as there are reams and reams and reams and reams of pornography, specifically straight submissive men have the least community that is focused on their needs, that is self-organized. And it's the self-organized that's the important part. People like Ferns have spent years of their life organizing groups for mixed femdoms and male subs, but it tends to be the case that while male subs are perfectly capable as individuals, there's this tendency for there not to be the same identity as sticking to each other. Now, if you put a bunch of female subs in a group, they will get together and they will form a sisterhood, and they'll basically do socialization that they've been encouraged to do because they are a girl. And dominant women will do the same thing. They'll start the sisters, and we'll talk about various, like, we'll do a little bit of measuring of who is toughest, but we'll also do a bunch of complaining and getting to know each other and talking through emotional dynamics and a whole toolkit that is built into the thing that many people who are assigned female at birth are raised to have as an advantage. And I find that dominant men will also self-sort. I personally don't believe that boys are given as much equipment in how to do these sorts of things. I think it's something that we could do boys better in their raising and teaching. But in this particular case, at least you'll have a bunch of dominant guys together talking shop. They'll get super into gear. They'll be talking about what's the best kind of knot, who's doing this, that's the other. But for the most part, submissive men are the least likely to do anything. And if they are socializing, it's very arm's length. And it's to the extent of, did you see Mistress So-and-so? They were hot. I'd love to have a session with her. I wish that was me. The conversations still tend to revolve around women in the focus as opposed to what they're doing. And I think that there's already a serious issue in heterosexuality that it tends to make women the object and men the subject, whether or not anyone involved in this actually wants that to be the case 24/7. So I'm not the only one to suggest this, and you should follow Alice in Bondageland as well. And one of the reasons why I recommend you follow her is that her opinions and presentation and the focus of the fetishes she focuses on as a dominant woman are not the same as me, and different perspectives are so good, and she's going to have insights I'll never have. But more than that, it's something that we've noticed that the men are not all right, and there's a lot of very upset, lonely, alienated, submissive men. And more than that, being a submissive man, a straight submissive man, goes against pretty much everything that boys are told from birth that there is a no-no. It's being vulnerable. It's allowing yourself to be less powerful than a woman. And, well, I don't doubt that many people who participate in BDSM, in fact, the majority, try to be as pro-equality as they can. And it's more often than not the dominant man, and even, yes, straight dominant man, will identify as feminists, more so than the general male population. But be that as it may, you have this ongoing problem that ultimately boils down to the fact that I don't think a lot of submissive men like themselves very much, and I don't think that they think anyone should like them. And because they don't like themselves, and that they don't like the fact that they're submissive men, they often don't end up liking each other, and they're scared of each other, and they're scared of flagging and asking to talk to each other, and they don't make these kind of bonds. But although I've been agitating and poking for approximately a year and a half that this should probably happen, the key thing is it can't be started by a woman. It has to be a thing for men, because I believe it's something where men are much better at flagging issues of their lived experience. And that doesn't mean that it's 100% perfect. We can see things like the manosphere going completely off the rails. But I genuinely like men. I like women too, but I genuinely like men, and I want them to do well. And the immediate success of the Good Boys Club has just shown that this is a thing that needed to happen. The Discord just, within approximately like 2 days, maybe 3 at most, it had 40 members and still climbing. And it was initially being wrangled by Peroxide and Charm Quirk, but Charm Quirk volunteers and too many things and had to take a little step back so they could get some real life breathing. Though, give them a thumbs up, as well as say thank you to Peroxide. They've been putting years of volunteering into making things a better place for everybody. If you've been able to find a Dom, there's a good chance that somewhere in the background, Peroxide did a tiny little bit of chipping away at that problem that keeps us all apart to make things go a little smoother. So yeah, that's a group where you can find other guys to talk to who are going through everything you're going through. I'm gonna drop a link to that in the comments so you guys can find it. It may even be first comment, who knows. And we will move on to the next question. That one's from someone called Metal Pale. How did your first exposure to BDSM/kink pique your interest? Or give you misconceptions? How did your sadism first manifest, and how did you try to resolve it with your learned ethics/morals? What's a memorable play experience that you find yourself trying to recapture? Now, that's a bunch of questions in each other. So, I have been kinky long before I had sexuality, and that's something that a lot of people may actually discover if they look back on their life stories. Some people, they never realized it until they discovered it. And some people are like me, where even before they knew what sex was, or they could possibly conceive of anything like sex, things involving captivity, vulnerability, things like loss of clothing, these factored into the sort of stories I would tell myself as a kid, and it's very easy to stumble across these sorts of things perfectly innocuously in the sort of fiction that is entirely age-appropriate for children. I would tell people about my male imaginary friend and how he got beaten up and robbed, and things like that would entirely be like, idea go in kid brain, idea come out the other side of kid brain, something. It is what it is, and I don't believe that, if you end up kinky, it was any sort of mistake. I think that system is normal. That is how human sexuality is functioning. It is a beautiful spectrum, and I think that the way that social sexuality and psychological sexuality is 50% of most human sexual function. You have like the upstairs and the downstairs. They're running off separate systems, but they can intersect. Fun fact, if you get a spinal injury that shuts down access to the downstairs, this stuff up here can be rewired via training and practice, so you could develop an orgasm off another nerve-rich area in your body. Let's say an ear being a popular topic. Also, people who have had spinal injuries will have fully functional genitals still, but they won't be able to feel anything from them because the communication upstairs and downstairs is lost. So you can't do the thing where you're touching a partner and it triggers them, and then the fantasies start flowing, or vice versa. That connection is gone. You may want to look into that further because it's a whole fascinating topic, but be that as it may, it kind of confirms my point that sexuality involves a lot of stuff up here. And just as human society is kind of a anything goes, anything is really possible almost, that means that anything is almost possible, that if you could conceive of it and if you could have emotions about it, you can probably fetishize it. Now, the biggest misconception I can say I approached kink with is a two-parter. One of which is that it's very easy to come in the door through fictional depictions of it, as opposed to seeing real-life good examples of people doing it, because it's not part of sex ed. And the second part is kind of accidental because of the way that a lot of kink light is baked into the way heterosexuality is supposed to work. And again, I say supposed to with the biggest, like, how people think, not as in this is the writ from biology. That because the prestige and the sexual attention and the pornography tends to be focused on fem-sub male dom pairings and heterosexuality, it's very easy, particularly if you've ever had a masochistic or non-specific fantasy, or if you are like me, a full, like, when it comes to sadomasochism, I switch in both directions. When it comes to power positions, despite my early misconceptions, I am not a good sub. And this is not one of those, oh, you haven't met the right dom yet, honey. You'd be a perfect switch if only you did. It's, whatever it is that I'm looking for involves so much control from me and so much alluring topping from the bottom and pushing his buttons that I can use my masochism to control and dom someone. But I kind of prefer my partner to have informed consent about this, and this was a bit of a hard lesson of dealing with the fact that I had several partners who were switches who didn't know how to deal with the fact that I have the ability to turn off what they were perceiving as my submissive vulnerability like that, which sounds like me tooting my own horn, but can actually be very disconcerting when your partner does it to you. And again, I don't think we talk enough about dominant vulnerability. I think that that's one of the advantages of being a female dominant, is that I'm allowed to say, hello, did you see the elephant in the room? We probably need to talk about Jumbo over there. Um, Now, there's a funny anecdote, and I'm going to be very careful here because, unfortunately, please tell me about your early, before you were anywhere close to the age of majority sexual experiences stories, tends to be places that you need to be careful about because they're often mining grounds for, please tell me, kiddie porn stories disguised as true-to-life stories. So, this was before I had sexuality. This was not sexual for me at the time, but furthermore, this involves elements of violence that would not be okay if it was any context other than the one it was happening in, which is when I was a little girl, and we mean like 3 or 4, one of the earliest things noted about me as far as my character was that my mother was a single mother, and she was a nerd, which meant that she had a lot of followers, and some of them were boyfriends, and some of them just enjoyed her company, and so on and so forth. And there was this wonderful young mother who had this sweet little pale-faced girl who had, like a precocious vocabulary, but very soon it would be noted amongst the various gentlemen callers that they'd be sitting in the living room talking about nerdy things with my mother, doing things as they were, and all the gentlemen, when I came into the room toddling in, my wee little self, would sit and adjust their posture a little bit, crossing their legs, putting something in their lap. And reportedly, this was because of my rather, whatever the opposite of endearing was, habit of earnestly and friendlily, in the most innocent way possible, climbing into the laps of these gentlemen, then standing up, jumping in the air, and landing as hard as I could. Now, this is obviously something I would not advise one to do without a consenting partner. At the time, I doubtlessly did not perceive it as anything other than, ah ha ha, this is funny, but there were probably some things way back when. Now, insofar as my exposure to BDSM formally, I became aware of it more early than some people are because it was part of my sex ed. There were some good parts and some bad parts. Some parts of my childhood, I kind of wish that I'd been exposed to less adult topics, but that's more of a general broad thing. Other parts, well, it worked out the way it did. I'm not going to be one of those people who are like, well, I was locked in a closet and beaten and I was fine, so if it was good enough for me in the 50s, it's good enough for you now. I don't know why you're so vulnerable. Um, but the blessing of the upbringing I got was that I knew about things like safe words, I knew about things like safe play, I knew about negotiation, I knew what the names of the roles were. Well, other people were figuring out what is kissing, and some of these things were like very good pieces of advice, even very good vanilla advice. Like, for example, it's not okay to be mad at someone for not being into you. That if someone turns you down, that's not a reason to punish them, even though that's shown a lot in fiction. That, oh, they rejected me, well, I'll show them. Um, And similarly, this helped, and it meant that I was fairly precocious as a teenager. I knew what I was looking for. The thing that I would say as a caveat is because of the way that sexuality is taught, we tend to teach it in the perspective that kink and any sort of fetish attraction, that is sexuality plus. That's the big leagues. And then everything else is the lead up point. And everybody's sexuality, by that assumption, is either you're gay or you're straight. That part was sort of being worked out in the 2000s, that we were getting the idea that this wasn't something you could just brush away, at least in 2000s Canada. But there was no advice for someone whose sexuality was irrevocably set to kinky. And there was, yes, roommates also providing their contributions. There was no effort whatsoever because there was no knowledge to explain that the reason why none of this sex stuff was working for me and the reason why it really hurt was that no amount of behavior on my partner's role would be able to arouse me or make this pleasurable. And it was very much pushed that any given pair of people, assuming they were not repulsive or terrible, would be compatible with each other if only they tried harder, if only he did more foreplay, if only you were more accepting and supportive. And this was a hard lesson I had to learn over my 20s and into my 30s, that no matter how awesome a human being is, if you're not compatible sexually, it's just not going to work. And you can't replace a desire for kink with vanilla foreplay. If what's going on up here is entirely whips and chains and exciting adventures where you're the Empress of Doom, trying to turn yourself into something you're not just is not going to work. And that probably was the hardest part. Um, I've been asked as a final question, what's a memorable play experience that you find yourself trying to recapture? I don't know. I have plenty of memorable play experiences, but I kind of like them existing in the moment, because my philosophy about kink is that any given pair of people will have a dynamic unique to them, and more so than that, any given time you play is going to be a little more different than the other time you played. And well, you can learn things about how things work, and you can get better at it, and you can push in particular angles. Ultimately, I think it's kind of fun in that there's always a little bit more to discover, and I find that I don't have a problem replicating the parts of the experience I like consistently if I have a partner I click with. Like, what I like best in kink is the sense of connection it gives me with the person I'm playing, this fusing of the self with another person where they push and I can find them and grab, and I pull and they bend to what I want. And this is done through their vulnerabilities and my control, and there's vulgarity, and there's pain, and there's possibly degradation and tying up, and there's lavish immersive fantasies, and maybe in my case, lately, a little bit of hypnosis and fetish clothing, and full commitment to whatever aesthetic and mood I'm going with here. And I think it's not necessary to keep trying to do it the same way. I think that it's a lot more like building a sandcastle. You're not going to build the same sandcastle twice. There's always going to be a little bit of difference. And let's move on to Charm Quark's question. That's charm_quark_ if you want to find them on Twitter. And I do recommend you do, because they're a lovely and wonderful gentleman. Quite intelligent, and although I've never seen them, I'm told very beardy. What general advice do you have for people venturing into long-distance play/relationships? And how do you and Silver, that's my property, use Pavlok in your play/dynamic? And how can male subs contribute to fostering spaces that are more welcoming to femdoms? Well, that's kind of a twofer, because the first two questions have to do with one topic, and the next question has to do with another. So I'm going to start with the first part, because that could go on a long time. As far as general advice for people venturing into a long-distance relationship, you can have the most amazing, zingy chemistry, but there's a phrase that works very well here to understand what's going on, and that's Disneyland Dad. Well, for some people, long-distance relationships just don't work because they can't get the closeness. For a lot of other people, it's easy to build intimacy fast and hard. Some of this is because when you're not with the person, you have to keep making certain kinds of effort to keep it going. But also, if you fall in love with someone and you're attached to them, it's easy to smooth over those parts where you wouldn't necessarily mind if it happened in person, but it doesn't matter when it's happening over text. So you're able to have all the interactions and the meetups be these bombastic things where you put all your effort into them, and it's Disneyland Dad, the way that if you're a divorced family and like you're normally raised by your mom and maybe a step parent, and then your dad swoops in sometimes and he takes you to Disneyland, and dad seems like the most wonderful thing ever, even though your relationship with the parent who does more contributions and looking after you is much deeper and involves much more complexity, but also involves much more scope of, I don't want to do my homework and eat vegetables. Well, Disneyland Dad doesn't care if you do your homework and eat vegetables. Disneyland Dad's never too tired to play ball with you because Disneyland Dad is only here when he feels like it and when he has the time to. Other than that, I think it's a good idea to have some expectations with a long-distance relationship of what your goals are. If you just want a long-distance relationship where you're never with each other, it helps to know that's what you're doing and what sort of circumstances it's fitting into. It also helps to have a plan of this will be X number of months and then we will be in person with each other, which can help with the yearning problem a little bit. The pandemic kind of put a kibosh in this for me because I have a long-distance relationship. Regularities and similarities in your day can build connection. There's a whole bunch of vanilla advice about long-distance relationships, and pretty much everything there is applicable right up until you get to the subject of play, which covers the question about how do I use a Pavlok. Okay, so a Pavlok is it's a device that allows a shock to be delivered through a wristband. It's gotten funding, so it's an actual product out there that you can buy. It has a little app that you can put on a phone. The phone app will allow an additional wonderful feature that it's designed to be able to make you do things like, oh, well, maybe it'll help you quit smoking or touching your face because it'll give you a shock whenever you bruise your hand up, or it'll force you to do jumping jacks, or it'll give you a small and reasonably bearable given the location shock. Needless to say, as soon as you gave someone a shocker that was specifically designed to zap humans and be warned to humans, the time it took a kinky person to decide this was what they wanted sur le boudoir, shall we say, was about the time it took them to click add to cart. And the extra bonus feature is that a lot of the little shocky products out there are remote control based, and they have a very limited range. A lot of people who want to use electricity in their play will use shock collars, which they will not put on the neck, because there is some evidence that the neck is not a place you want to be shocking. Too many important things there. I will leave that to the doctors to discuss, but on large muscle groups like the thigh. Now, with the Pavlok, it's generally considered to be about the equivalent of a static Zoc, although do remember, any electrical play carries the possibility of risk. It could trigger a heart problem. It is unlikely to, but it could. So keep that in mind. Be aware of your risks. Whether you are personal responsibility, informed, consensual kink, or whatever, don't do electrical play until you take the time to determine what might possibly happen to your partner. Because at the very least, if they got hurt, you would feel terrible, and we don't want that. Much less the obvious your partner would be badly hurt and they might not want to play with you anymore, or you might face legal consequences. More than that, you care about being a moral human. Well, the Pavlok has the ability to put an app on your phone that when your partner is wearing the device, you can go doot, 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 zip, 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 or you can make it buzz, or you can make it beep. It's entirely up to you. Maybe that's your cup of tea. It also allows you to control the level of the shock, although the user can set the maximum amount of shock, that is the person who's wearing it, when they hand control of the device to you. So it's not one of those things you go haywire with it. It is part of a larger scope of teledildonics, which you need to follow buttplug.io's stuff because they are fucking brilliant. There is a wonderful scope of technology that has really been given a kick in the pants by the pandemic, designed to allow you to do various remote control sex toys. Sometimes they're vibrators, sometimes they're fucking machines, or various penis cups, or we haven't really worked out the right... I like the term own a hole, except some of them are not for women, so fleshlight tends to be the generic thing, the way that Kleenex is, because you know what it is, but it also is vague enough. It could be any particular copying orifices, but basically pocket pussies, massagers, all these things are possible to get. There's even something called the Edge-O-Matic, which uses orgasm technology to turn off a stimulating machine by measuring when the person approaches a real orgasm. Which uses a pressure-sensitive butt plug, because all humans, when they come, experience impossible to fake anal contractions. Who knew? Anyway, the Pavlok is one of those things where you're only going to use it in very limited consequences. It sounds very hot to have someone rigged up and zapping them at all times, but to be perfectly honest, most people do not want a sudden zap when they're in the middle of making a cup of tea, or trying to put the dishes away, or what have you. It makes a lot more sense to use it largely just in the context of day-to-day play. Not day-to-day play, I mean individual play sessions or scenes, whatever you choose to call them. And for us, it's usually combined with webcam, because what's the point in shocking him if I can't see what his reactions are? So I'll have my little phone set up, and I usually use my phone to webcam with him, and I'll be watching his reactions, and he'll have the Pavlok somewhere, and I will be doot-doot-dooting the button, because we don't do punishment where he's ever bad, we do punishment because I'm a sadist and he's a masochist, and this is how we say, I love you. Or, for some people who do not experience love or don't love their partners, this is how I say, I appreciate you. I try to be inclusive that way. And pretty much any teledildonics toy can be done that way. Yes, you could theoretically go on a date with your partner with a vibrating butt plug, but unless you enjoy the novelty of being squirmingly aroused in public and can skirt the line of that being worthwhile, personally, I prefer saving them for at home myself. Some people really find, though, I went out to dinner and I had a vibrating butt plug and it was awesome. Or the possibility that it could happen at any time as being inherently arousing. Lots of fun options. Now, this question, how can male subs contribute to fostering spaces that are more welcoming to female dominance? And this is a hard one to answer without devoting an entire question period to it, and it's also a hard one to turn into anything other than a list of don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. So if you just sat through this channel and you just looked through everything I've said, or if you're the sort of person who sought this out, you probably don't need to be told, don't send a dick pic or a picture of your butthole. Don't call her Mistress Goddess. Don't send a one-line email with hey or hey babe. There's lots and lots of don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. But the biggest thing that you can do, that is the easiest thing to do, is that if there's a female dominant in a space, treat her presence in the space as having the right to be there and value there for something other than whether or not she can be your dom or if she can dominate someone. That's the biggest challenge to keeping women in spaces like that. And it's kind of the same problem as the issue of being in a comic book store, that everybody may still assume that, well, girls don't do such and such. You're a fake nerd girl. You're just here for attention, or the inability to see you as anything other than a possible partner. when women are hanging out in a space that's dedicated to femdom, like a munch or like a subreddit where they're discussing porn that they're into, they're usually able to be friends with other dominant women because they can have that back and forth conversation about what they have in common that transcends just, I want a partner, I want a partner, I want a partner, I want a partner, oh my god, if I don't get a partner, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. And this tendency to basically not perceive the presence of dominant women except for the context of getting a partner with them and bombarding them all with UBGF, um, tends to be very off-putting, the way that if you create a female avatar in some MMOs, you will still have random guys follow you around showering gifts at you that don't actually even improve your play experience, because the whole purpose behind playing the MMO is so you can earn these prezzies, so they've also taken that experience away from you unless you're, like, fleeing various and sundry things, or they're giving you things that are above your level, so they're fucking up your difficulty, and that's not good either. But anyway, like I said, I like men. Try to be a friend and try to be a fellow traveler as opposed to a possible partner. You don't need to bubble wrap them with layers of chivalry and miladying and all that. Just assume, for example, if there's a woman hanging out in a femdom forum and you want to interact with women for something other than a transactional will or will you not be my dom, that she may be there because she wants information on how to dom better, or she may be there because she's horny, or she may be there because she's trying to understand herself better, and let her have the space to do that and be interested in those things, and you'll attract more women to the group, and when you attract more women to the group, paradoxically, it increases the chance that you'll be having this conversation and you'll seem like a normal member of the group, and that she'll sidle into your DMs. Like, yes, she will sidle into your DMs and be like, oh my god, that was so insightful. I had no idea that it worked like that, or that a guy could feel like that when that happened to him, or oh my god, I can't believe that's true, or oh my god, the way you described that thing was so amazing, or you're so funny, let's talk about this fandom that we share in common. You will make these genuine connections with women that are much more likely to turn into her ending up being your mistress for a short amount of time or forever. Do that, it'll work very well. Much better. It's not guaranteed, because it's also a lottery, but it'll work a lot better than you be my GF, you be my GF, and you can probably do that, and I have faith in you. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about my new Roomba. For those of you who've been long-term listeners / readers, you're probably familiar with something I call the Roomba tax. And remember when I was talking about getting a lot of messages that ask you, be my GF? Mistress? And also I get a lot of messages asking me to give them one-on-one BDSM sex ed, usually from a very basic perspective, and I respect that. I just physically do not have enough time to give everyone the care and concern they would need to that. And I know some people learn better from the context of a conversation, but it'd be much better if they participated in the community, because I should not be the sole authority of information. I really, I abdicate that. I will never be the queen of BDSM. I will never be the queen of femdom, and that is a firm belief. I know my limits here, and I'd like people to go out there and seek other sources and use me as part of a beautiful mosaic. But the fact that I get a lot of messages like this also include a lot of people who are basically sexually harassing at me. They will not stop masturbating at me, persisting in demanding relationships, demanding sexual activities, demanding nudes, any number of different behaviors. So I could get mad at them, I could ignore the messages, I could throw a tantrum, I could lead them on. There's any number of different behaviors I could do, but I finally hit on something that works really well. Whenever someone wanders into my inbox unsolicited, and I have many, many flags saying, I will not dom you, I am not your dominant, I am, oops, hit the camera, I am not interested, I ask for a Roomba. I have discovered that it is nigh on impossible for a man to continue masturbating and fetishizing you when he's talking to a woman who's making Roomba noises and talking how she wants to stick googly eyes onto it. Roomba. And Roombas are kind of awesome. They are a not necessary item, but they're cute, and I like cute little robots, and that's great. And I also like pandas too, you can tell because I love them. But be that as it may, people would always ask me, well, if you ask all these strange random people in your inbox for a Roomba, aren't you worried someday you're going to get a Roomba? And that was my point. Yes, either I have a fun conversation that doesn't make me feel sexually harassed, that we both won by having, because most people also find it very charming and disarming when they're like, and you're like, Roomba, please. Um, Basically, either it goes that way, or I might actually get a Roomba. And it's come to people's attention that I actually wanted a Roomba, and one of my readers did. I did not expect this to happen. I expected to go my entire life without receiving a gift Roomba unless it came from a close loved one. There was a good chance I was going to get a Roomba for my birthday coming up next month from Silver. That was the closest I'd ever get to a Roomba unless I bought one myself. And this charming fellow in the UK sent me a Roomba via an Amazon gift card, and now I have a Roomba, and as I promised, if someone got me a Roomba, they had the right to name it. So I can't really show it to you because it's currently on the floor charging, but I posted a bunch of pictures in my Twitter, and maybe when I get better at this OBS stuff, I'll put in like little clips and stuff when I'm editing things. But yeah, so I have a Roomba now, and the question I got asked following up with that is, well, what now that you have a Roomba? And I mean, my roommate suggested, well, why don't you ask for a Crycut, which is a home crafting CNC machine of a similar price to a Roomba. I honestly think I'm going to keep asking for a Roomba. Maybe Socktoy would like a friend. I'm not necessarily home all the time. It could use some company. iRobot actually recommended they wandered into Thread. I suspect they know about the Roomba tax, but anyway, they suggested that I ask for the Brava next, the mopping thing, but I'm pretty much happy, or maybe parts for Socktoy, because they are kind of modular, and maybe I'll upgrade them. But Roombas are awesome, and I like Roomba. And the question that Paintoy2 on Twitter asked is, what is your advice for someone married with kids and discovers at the age of 40 they're actually super kinky, but their partner isn't interested? Asking for a friend. Well, I think the thing that you have to have this conversation with your friend is when they say their partner isn't interested, why isn't their partner interested? There's a lot of whys that range from, I can't possibly enjoy this, this is a hard limit and is deeply distressing, to, I don't understand this and I think this is optional, to, I have no problem with you doing this with somebody else, I'm just never going to like this, to, I am deeply distressed that you were into this, to, not now, honey. I'm trying to make sure that a child doesn't shove Cheerios up their nose. Or any number of different reasons why they're not interested. And that's where things are gonna get a little dicey, because before you can figure out where things are going to go, ooh, nice lens flare. You need to realize why they don't want to. And that doesn't mean agitate them and say, like, please, 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 for those people who might. I don't think Paintoy would. It's a matter of the challenge of getting across how important something is to you. And here's the thing that's going to suck. It is perfectly possible that your sexuality may turn out to be a deal breaker. We have the term fetish for a reason, a thing in exclusion to everything else that is your sexuality. Now, my observation is that some people who have fetishes still have perfectly functional sensory stuff. Like, they'll still masturbate with their hand even if their brain is running a track of something like rubber or being tied up or, I don't know, creating a K-pop band entirely dedicated to ball busting. If whatever their particular heart's desire is. And you're going to have to figure out, or I'm sorry, your friend is going to have to figure out, is this my sexuality? Or is this the tapestry of my sexuality? And more to that, is my partner saying no to this because the whole thing is like repulsive, ick, no, or yeah, I can't possibly, this wouldn't work for me, this is the antithesis of my sexuality? Or are there parts of it that you can integrate into the story with your partner? And you also have to decide, why do I love my partner and what attracted me in the first place? And one of the things that's very hard about sexuality, and this goes back to a point that I made earlier, is that we've long maintained that any two individuals of the correct sexual orientation should be able to make it work. And there's been very much the idea of, well, there's better partners or worse partners, and that there's people who are more attractive or less attractive, and there's people with better personalities who are more universally attractive, but there's not much thinking about, but are we psychologically attractive? And for the most part, the closest we've ever come to that is worrying about, do we share the same values? Well, here is where you need to work on, do you share the same values? Can you get into the same ballpark enough where it works? And I wish what I could tell you is you just could sit down with her and have a conversation where you discuss, oh, well, we just have to try XYZ. And she'll be like, well, honestly, it's not my thing, but it arouses me to see you aroused, and we'll do this. And I wish it was that easy, but the truth is your partner may never be into it, and you're going to have to decide how important it is to you. And I'm not saying that you need to run out and get a divorce, but if you're getting advice from me, and ask other people for advice about this, please do. I am so dedicated to my kinks because they are so important to me that I have had to leave relationships because the sex wasn't working with truly wonderful human beings I could otherwise have seen myself spending the rest of my life with. And that's painful, but it is what it is, and we do what we can with what we have. And I'm sorry that the world is that way, and I wish I could tell you otherwise. So if your kinks are a deal breaker, and if your significant other doesn't do it, the first step you're going to have to do is find out why your partner won't. And if it's won't as in I absolutely can't, and I will not, and I refuse to, then you're either going to be sexually dissatisfied, you can't get rid of your kinks, sorry, there's no evidence you can, or you're gonna have to find some opportunity that lets you get release. And I don't advise people to cheat, but I do caution that if you decide that you're gonna suppress your sexuality deep down inside and push it down forever, well, you said your friend was the age of 40. You could wait the next decade until you're not going to uproot anything in your kid's life by having the financial expense of divorce or whatever, and you could try to martyr yourself for your sexuality, but there's a certain point where every adult, and every being for that matter, reaches a threshold that they just can't anymore. And you need to understand and deal with where your pain threshold is going to be. And some people spend the rest of their life living in the closet and they never go out there and find their dreams. And it's never going to be too late to do it. Like, if you are watching this and you are 81 and you've, like, just buried your partner and gotten over grieving them, and your sexuality has never really worked with them, but you're ready to try, yes, you can try BDSM for the first time as, like, an 80-something person. It's okay. There's space for you, too. But it's going to be difficult and it's going to be challenging, but if you suppress it, it's not going to work. You can't just choose to ignore it. You are either trying to kill a part of yourself by smothering it, which is no bueno, or you're gonna end up with it being pushed down and pushed down and pushed down until it pops back up again in the way that is just disastrous for your life. Like, you're going to meet someone who is an absolute perfect dom for you after repressing for 8 years at a time when you're really vulnerable, and you're going to fall madly in love with your new supervisor who kind of non-teleologically flirts with you, and you're going to go through an immense quantity of, how do I deal with this? And she's going to be like, what did I do? Am I harassing my employees? This guy immediately quit his job and he like, you may never cheat on your partner, but you need to fix this problem because it can and it will eat you up inside, and you deserve to be happy. And it's going to be super hard to explain this because most people treat our fetishes like, well, this is a value add. This is like you like creme brulee. No one's going to die if they don't get creme brulee. But one of the things you have to accept is that if you have a fetish, like in the strictest medical definition, you are what the definition also calls asexual. And this is a common mistake in asexuality, that people see it and are like, oh, well, I can accept some people have no libidos. It's a little weird, but okay. I'm open-minded, and I can understand that some people don't have the same frame of reference as I do, but asexuality is more than that. There's the demisexual people who are typically used to mean people who experience attraction, but only in the context of emotional connection. Like, you could put all the attractive human beings in front of them in the form of looks, and they're going to be like, well, but that's aesthetically very pleasant, but it's not doing anything downstairs. I also make the distinction that it gets a little wibbly that also when you don't want to and you genuinely don't want to, even if the sexual context arouses the person, you can make a play for that, but that's getting off the point. With asexuality, in addition to the demisexual people, there's this category called gray ace. And gray ace is where they file all the various people who have sexuality. It's just under certain circumstances that are not the standard thing. And that, although they never use the word, include fetishes, people who are only or primarily sexually attracted to something in the context of whatever their fetish, BDSM, rubber, dressing up like a horse, putting themselves under extreme chastity control for no fap purposes, whatever their pleasure is, even if it's like an emotional fetish, because one of the other fun things about asexuality is it's also where they stick the people who are perfectly capable of sex, but they just do not have the wiring to fall in love, not capable of it. Some of these people, by the way, can have very loving marriages, they just will never experience the woo of love. They will love their partner, they just won't love their partner and the boom ba that some people experience with falling in love. Again, English language imperfect. Sorry, I don't have better vocabulary. But getting back to the point, much how we have since established that going into the closet and trying to fix yourself via not being gay just ain't helping anyone, and anything else in that big rainbow spectrum being suppressed is actually really bad for you. It's not good to suppress that part of your sexuality, and I'm sorry there's not a lot of support for it, even as it's a very normal way to want things. But if this is your primary sexuality and you must have it, you're gonna have to reconcile you need to have it. And the other point is, if the reason why your friend's wife is like, nah, I can't, is simply because they think of it as a set of behaviors that is nothing like what you're actually into, or you could be flexible about how it's expressed, there you might have something to work with. And people like Giles English from Becoming Her Slave, as I believe what he calls himself on Twitter, have some more insights there, where their partner was not into it, it wasn't working, and it was feeling like work for her. And then their solution was they threw in the towel and they were like, okay, well, how do I make you feel dominant? I make you feel dominant by seceding actual power in the relationship over to you. Well, that's my thing. And that might not be your thing, but I'm going to assume that in this case, and it's quite possible there isn't, that your friend's wife is sexually attracted to you and wants this to work. Well, in that case, you may be in a position to make it function. And by the way, if they're like, we can only do it with the lights off, in the strict position that is only according to what I'm into, whether this be a very, very precise definition of vanilla, or whether it be her own fetishes that she's never considered are a fetish, well, that's not gonna work. I'm sorry. It's the same way that if she's just not into it, she may not be a bad person, but she's just not into it. As for, like, what do you do about the kids? You do the best you can, and you try not to feel too guilty about that, because you're a human too, and you will probably, your friend will probably be a better father if they can be a whole person. And I don't have enough advice to be able to tell your friend that, oh yes, you should just run out and get a divorce and you will totally fix all your life problems and your sense of dissatisfaction with getting a dom, but it's okay to want things. It's okay to need things. And it's okay to discuss what is and isn't a deal breaker with your partner. And there's a chance that it may actually work out. And without more information, I can't tell you whether or not you're doomed, but you will need to reconcile the whole spectrum there. And I can tell you one thing, which is, don't feel guilty for wanting things. Wanting things is okay. You're not wanting some selfish luxury that humans should learn to live without. There's a reason why so many of our songs are about love and attachment, and so few of them are about cheese and tables and roofs and trees. And you get where I'm going with this, is it's a big part of being human, your feelings about this, even your feelings of not having these feelings. So, we've gone super dark. So let's see if we can find something a little more cheerful to change the topic a bit. Let's go back to a question from Black Wolf's Pup, because they gave me several. What are some household items a person can be safely kinky with? What's your favorite vanilla item that people might not suspect? Is there something that you see commonly that always makes you giggle kinkily because of your wonderfully twisted mind? Well, hairdryer. One of the more improvised scene I've done, and I'm really big on using everyday objects as long as you're using them sensibly, is a hairdryer. And with this particular case, in my misspent youth, that is to say my 20s, I and a group of people tootled up to Toronto to check out Northbound Leather, play at a local play party, and rent a nice hotel room together to get up to kinky hijinks. And with this gentleman, he was not restrained in any way, and I was armed only with the hairdryer that came with the hotel. And I picked certain sensitive spots on his body, and there was about 5 of them in total, and I told him they had numbers assigned to them. And then I turned the hairdryer onto those spots, which, as you do it over time, begins to really hurt. And in order to get me to switch, he had to name one of these numbers. And I didn't tell him what numbers were for these spots, but I just moved them around accordingly to, like, say, 1 was 1 nipple, 4 was another nipple, and I'd keep doing that. And eventually he got so rattled by this treatment that he started, like, shouting the same number twice because he was getting so, like, out of it. And this was probably the most intense scene he'd ever done to this point, with no bondage and just a trusty old hairdryer and really no lasting damage, since, well, it was getting kind of toasty. I wasn't actually trying to blister or do anything up to even a first-degree burn. Notably with this particular individual, I did one step further for the mindfuck. When it seemed like he was getting a little bit calmer with this, I just switched the numbers. I told him, and now I've switched the numbers. And we began again. And then I gave them some very, very prolonged aftercare, which made a huge difference to them and their happiness. By the way, the sound quality on this seems to be working a lot better, so I would like to apologize in advance for all those people who've been listening to my very quiet channels that are bordering on ASMR. And then they're going to play this in their playlist, and they're going to get their eardrums blown out. I'm sorry about that. I do apologize in advance. I'm still learning what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. So yeah, hairdryer is something that now when I see them, I get a little bit of because that's a good memory and it was a good thing to work with. And similarly, your house is full of all sorts of clips, clamps, clothespins. I recommend that, well, bondage kits can make things easier. For example, the last time I did anything, I made an improvised gag out of a pair of tea towels. I tied a knot in one of them and I used the other tea towel to lengthen it for a strap, and bingo! Easy on, easy off. And then you can launder the tea towels when you're done. That's also a very important step. Be sure to wash your tea towels afterwards. They're full of drool. But you are limited by your creativity and your sensibility. And there's some basic caveats, like don't stick anything up a butt that doesn't have a flared base, and avoid sticking basically most objects in a butt that could come apart or break. No light bulbs, no bottles, no glass tubes, no jars, no multiple piece items, no porous items. If you really must stick, say, a plunger up somebody, and I've never done this, but some people have tried it, put a condom on the handle of the plunger. Put a condom on things that you use that way. Probably for the best. Porous, bad. Porous, difficult to clean. Porous, more likely to tear or damage the individual in a way you didn't plan. Other than that, basic other everyday household items that you might have kicking around. IKEA beds. I guarantee that if you look in the back setting of many dungeons or Dom's bedrooms, she will either have that bed or she will have a bed model called the Lervik, and you've probably seen it. It's a white metal bed with a curly ornate headboard. These are super cheap and they pop up over and over again, but IKEA makes something strong enough that you can use it for bondage. By the way, another easy thing to use for bondage, if you have absolutely no tools, rope ties. They tend to be about the right length for simple stuff. it's hard to screw up, and they're also very easy to untie if you're like, crap, 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 your hands are getting numb. Same safety rules apply, whatever's in your house. Oh yes, if you need to, hair clips of various levels of ouchie make great nipple clips. They're an alternative if you're like most people and you don't really hang things to dry anymore, so you have to specially buy clothespins. I know I always had to whenever I wanted to get up to hijinks like that. And the last question, how can a person tell if their kink is healthy versus unhealthy? What are some things you can do to make sure it's healthy? What are some red flags? What are some ways to extricate oneself from an unhealthy kink situation, either resources or strategies? Well, that's a lot to unpack, and this is a hard thing to call because it's perfectly possible to be in an abusive vanilla relationship. If you're in an abusive relationship, the best thing you can do is not let your social support network get cut, and often it can be helpful to find somebody else to assist you because it's a lot harder for an abuser to manipulate or get their hooks into two different people at the same time. I'm not any sort of sex ed coach. I'm not an expert, so defer to the better resources about that. But people are surprisingly understanding about, I need to leave now. Can you walk me to my car? Hi, person I've never met. Of course I'll do that. Gee, I will pretend I'm not aware of the fact that you're just wearing your coat over naught but the lingerie because the person you scheduled a date with just threw your clothing out the window and told you to go get them, and you decided they didn't respect your limits, so now you're leaving, and you were in fact wearing their coat, and it's time to go home. But there's two different ways that could be unsafe, and one of them is, can your partner describe what they're going to do and the approximate mechanics? Have you played with this person before? If you're doing a lot of casual play, does this person have references? And by references, I do not mean their partner. There's the standard thing of when you're thinking about getting into a relationship with someone, how do they talk about their exes? Do they talk about those crazy people who done them wrong? Are they still friends with their exes? How do they treat people they don't have to be nice to? One of the pieces of advice I give that most people seem to neglect, if you are a sub, put as much rigorous effort into learning BDSM safety as if you were a dom. It may be a matter of life or death someday that you will be about to do bondage with someone, and you will look at it and be like, that is not a load-bearing beam, mistress, and they will be like, oh, fuck! And everything will be okay, because you won't have been dropped on your head. Yeah, other than that, if you're playing with new people, make sure you have a safe call, that is, tag somebody that you know to text you at a pre-planned time, and if you don't text them back, or if you're concerned about people knowing about that, if you don't text them the right thing, then they know where you are. Don't let people take you places where you don't know where you are. This is kind of a big one. Don't let them take you places where you can't afford to get yourself back out again. For example, if they take you across town on a date, wonderful expenses and stuff, and you need to blow, make sure that you're not in a position where lack of transportation or guilt can put you in a, what do I do? For example, old dating advice, and this works for anybody, carry mad money. That means if you get mad, you can leave. It does not mean money that you can spend on popcorn. This is one of those things that will help protect you, since one of the things abusers are looking for is positions of vulnerability and places where they make you feel obligated or sorry for them. And that includes, oh no, I need to fill up on gas. Could you spot me a 20? Oops, there goes your taxi money. Often abusers aren't really as overtly malicious and Machiavellian. They will have elaborate persecution scripts where they're the hero of their own story who has never done anyone wrong, and they just moved on their impulses, and they're a daring do person who knew that you really wanted it. Other than that, beware of any sort of dynamic that blows up very quickly, very fast, and super intense. Make sure that you have some perspective. The more perfect and wonderful people seem to be, the more it's probably a good idea to take some slow time. You need to be able to see how this person reacts when they don't get their way and someone says no to them. because that's another clear measure of how they handle it. Do they fly into guilt trips? Do they start beating themselves up? Oh, I should have known you didn't like that. All these things are things to watch out for. And as far as, like, is a dynamic healthy or not, can you actually withdraw consent without terrible things happening to you? And I don't mean, like, if I stop being a submissive, will I stop having a relationship? That's kind of unavoidable. I mean, if I stop being a submissive, will I end up being homeless? Um, any situation where you can get stuck like that puts you in a lot of danger. The other one is, are you taking medical or psychological harm beyond, ooh, neat, bruises, that's awesome? Are you taking financial harm beyond what is something you are comfortable with dealing with? Are you being offered something that seems too good to be true? Now, I know a lot of us have terrible self-esteem, so even the fact that someone loves you may feel like that. But I mean, like, you're idly browsing around and you have a 2-line profile because you haven't gotten around to filling it out, and someone says they're your mistress now and they love you and they're sending you pictures of this hot woman and they even seem okay. Well, now is not the time to send them blackmail videos to play out that fantasy you always wanted to have. Again, take it slow. People who are worth it are willing to take it slow and respect your limits. They will not push your boundaries in a way you are not comfortable or ready for. When you say, I can't handle that, they will be like, oh, well, thank you for telling me. A good measure of safety is not necessarily, do they never fuck up, because everyone will fuck up sometimes. It's, how do they handle the fuck ups afterwards? Are they more concerned about what will people think and you can't tell anyone and making you not feel things, or are they more concerned about repairing the injury and understanding so it will never happen again? Other than that, my other piece of advice is try to think through the logical consequences of doing whatever it is you want to do. Like, if you want to do breath play with your partner, consider the ramifications. What do I do if they stop breathing? What do I do if I do them a serious injury? What do I do if, and if you'd like to receive breath play, consider, what do I do if my partner deprives me of oxygen accidentally and they really fuck up and they, like, compress an artery the wrong way and they have bad luck and they give me a stroke and I have reduced cognitive function thereafter? What does that mean? Is it going to be okay? Would I be comfortable with my partner having that on their conscience? Things like that are very important when you're thinking about, like, do I want to do higher risk behaviors? So, it looks like we've ended our Q&A on a more serious note. That is everything I got suggested, and it's time to do those promotional things you may or may not have seen when you came in here, and let me flash that for you again, that I have a book coming out on May 1st, Corporate Conditioning, a Femdom mind control cyberpunk office romance. This has captivity, hypnotism and mind control, neural reprogramming, latex that's flagged as being a pseudo-modern material that's wonderful, and not quite latex, but it's totally latex. Penetration, forced orgasms, and a zinging connection from the perspective of a female dominant who develops a budding attraction to a prisoner she's supposed to reprogram. Like I said, you can pre-order that on Amazon right now. There may even be available via Dead Tree version already due to the vagaries of Amazon's system. Please do take a chance to buy it. Ironically, the more of these that sell, the less I have to subject myself to corporate stuff. I do appreciate you looking into that. It's available on Amazon, and there is a link to that down below in the description of this. And while you're going down there, by the way, if you don't shop at Amazon.com, just change the .com in the URL to .ca, .de, or whatever applicable Amazon channel you buy from. But, so let's say you've gone down to that place below the video and you're having a little bit of fun down there. Why don't you take the time to click subscribe? I bet that's a good idea, isn't it? That's a good way to be reminded, particularly if you click that bell. Doesn't the bell look clickable? Aren't buttons fun? Yeah, you really want to work that algorithm. You want to give me attention. You want to give me all that attention. And I think think that that's probably a good place to sign off because I managed to record an hour and a half. So I appreciate you coming out here. Do check out my blog at OMissPearl.com, my Twitter at OMissPearl, the Instagram where I occasionally post stuff, this YouTube channel and its archives. And you know what? You should sign up for my Patreon. You should support this channel. You could get stories that aren't released anywhere else, chances to vote on things, chances to get my undivided attention, personalized thank yous, a Discord exclusively available to people who are fans of my stuff, who participate in my Patreon, a few other stars that I've invited because they're awesome humans, updates on blog posts before they're live, all sorts of wonderful things. And I have opportunities ranging from $2 to my ridiculous Roomba tier. There's something for every price point. If you want to sign up for 1 month because that's all you can afford, I'm completely understanding. I'm not going to feel insulted if you stop signing up, if you come back. I appreciate any support you give. This is not one of those, I'm a Femdom, give me money, I'm dominating you. This is a, hey, I have a website that's one of the more popular Femdom stories blogs on there. I know I'm on the front page of Google Hits a lot of the time when you look up Femdom stories. Servers cost money. I actually have to put money back into the kitty of that. I'm not paying other people to masturbate. And the more likely I am to get paid, the more time I have to focus on making videos with a potato, and the less time I have to spend, I don't know, giving into capitalism. So, having done the change for the vlogger, yeah, like, subscribe, show that you appreciate me because I'm awesome, or possibly I'll put my hand right there to show you. Try my book because I think it's nice. Try one of my other books, try my Patreon, read my blog, it's completely free. Follow me on Twitter, I spend too much time there, and have a good